my work as a community development worker at Children's Aid, I'm too aware of the housing problems faced by families, children and youth that we serve, and the adverse impact on their lives, including in some cases admission to child welfare care. And I'm excited to work with you today on solutions and pushing the government towards action. So this summit was called Stable and Affordable Housing, and what do we need to move forward on that goal, in addition to the mobilizing that Mike talked about? And I think at minimum we need three things. We need to know the scope of the problem and who's affected, and some of that has been commented on with your comments. We need to know what is meant by affordable housing, which also came up in some of your comments. And to ensure that we're talking about truly affordable housing. And we need a set of integrated policies that fit with our definition of affordable housing. I think Michael made a comment about not letting other people define the agenda for us. So let's start by looking at the scope of the problem. And no doubt in your communities, and I think that's one of the values that will come with the mobilizing, is you know the snapshot of need in your communities, and you know the people affected. But in Ontario, in 2006 517,000 Ontario households were paying more than 50% on shelter costs, and 1.2 million households were paying more than 30%. And of the ones paying more than 50%, 80% run ODSP in Ontario work. So that gives you a picture. But stats don't tell the whole story, because I think that's where we need the information from communities. That we're talking about low-income families that are marginally employed. We're talking about seniors, people with disabilities, people with mental health issues, newcomers in racialized communities, people that are precariously employed or have just lost their jobs, and also homeless youth and wards that are leaving Children's Aid. We all know what isn't affordable housing. That's when you can't afford to eat and pay your rent, or you can't afford to keep an address for a full year, or you're moving in and out of shelters, or you're overcrowded because you're splitting the rent with another family. So knowing the scope is very important when we talk about mobilizing towards solutions, because if we don't know what we're talking about, the solutions are not going to fit. And that leads to our second challenge, which people have already touched on, which is defining affordable housing. And we have to come to a common definition where that word gets distorted and used. As you said, the Housing Opportunity Today plan, the Affordable Housing Program that was a national and provincial program that was 20% below average rents. We all know average rents have spiked up in the last decade because of weakened rent controls or the lack of rent controls. So that's very important. The lucky thing is that we had a National Housing Act, I think after World War II, where they defined affordable, and maybe we have to look at the issue of gross, but they defined it as a percentage of income. And they set the benchmark. I think at one point it was even 25% of income, but now it's 30%. And yet, even though one division of the national government sets that, another division sets up programs that don't meet that test. So that is a problem. And as Utaka went through the green document, he commented that we're holding our definition as at least 30%. And I think that can be debated or that can be amended, but we don't think it should be any weaker than that. So I guess the other problem with some of the programs that came is that they were just for certain bands of people, and we've already seen that from the federal government, that it's housing for seniors or it's housing for the disabled. And when we know the scope of the problem and we know our definition of affordable, we won't let the governments away with those kind of patchwork programs. So what kind of housing solutions do we need in broad policy terms? I guess there's three things that I'd like to comment on. They have to be integrated solutions and multi-pronged. One patchwork program will not work. They have to be permanent solutions, not the kind of 5-year program like we got with the roof allowance that very few people were even eligible for, or the, I think they called it the housing allowance program that we piloted in Toronto. We need solutions that are comprehensive to meet the scope of the problem, that address our definitions of affordable. We also need benefits that are actually generous enough to get us where we want to go. You know, $50 isn't going to cut it, $100. And we need policies that pay attention to the changing needs in our communities. And I think that's getting at the point you're talking about being flexible and making sure that it's encompassing those that have access and equity issues and people that are sometimes hurt by our implementation of policies without us doing that intentionally. So in specific terms, we need 3 strategies at least. New supply of affordable housing, which I'm not going to speak to because Harvey's going to speak to it. We need income solutions that will help people pay the rent. And we need rent control and regulation, which I'm also not going to get into in a lot of detail. I think people well know in this room what's needed there. So in terms of income solutions, this would have two parts to it. One is one that people have fought very hard with a 25 and 5 and other anti-poverty campaigns, is we need improvements to our social assistance rates. They have deteriorated over the last decade or more, and they do not meet people's real needs. The second thing we need is a universal housing benefit, and I think that speaks to the points of people saying that people should be able to stay in situ if they're living in good housing, or they should be able to move around. And we're not talking about a housing benefit that lasts 5 years. We're talking about something that would be long-term, permanent, and be universally available to people of low income. There is a group, some of the people are here today from Daily Bread Food Bank and the Metcalf Foundation and ONFA and some landlord groups that have come up with a document called a Housing Benefit for Ontario. And I think that in some shape or form, people will be calling for a housing benefit in this new housing policy of the government. So I recommend that you have a look at that. Your community may want changes to it, but I think it's a discussion piece that people can use as a tool in their communities to improve what the ask is or to support what that ask is. So to conclude, we all know that inaction on the affordable housing front is not on, and that we have very strong expectations of this government that they're going to include a very strong and effective housing policy and a poverty reduction plan. We face a crisis that is man-made and government-made, and it can be resolved. And the challenge is before all of us to work together and to mobilize, to speak on some common themes, and in some cases, some unique themes based on what our communities need to turn things around in Ontario so that everybody has a right to affordable housing. Thank you.